Should we just keep turning them off
Make
and
it
on
easy for
all
'em.
the time? Good evening. Welcome to the River Falls Municipal Utility Advisory Board meeting for January 21st. Could we have the roll call?
Mashevsky,
Here.
Odine,
Here.
Swanson, Richter,
Here.
Spafford,
Here.
Wells Mangold, Toom,
Thank you. Looking for approval of the minutes from the December 17th meeting.
I move approval of the minutes.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same. Minutes are approved. Now is the time of our meeting for public comments. We're actually probably going to do two sections of public comments. If we need it tonight, the first would be right now, and then the second would be after the presentation from Leslie. If anybody's interested, you can step up. All right. Oh, okay.
It's just real quick.
Don't forget to sign in and introduce yourself. And
There is no sign-in sheet. Okay. My name is Patricia LaRue. I live at 49 Marcella Court. And this time I just have a very quick comment. And that I was at the November 15th evening scoping meeting. The question was asked, what happens if the date comes to remove Powell Falls and we don't have the money to decommission and remove it? And FERC's comment to that was, once the commission gets to the point where they issue a decommissioning order, there's going to be requirements, and requirements usually include strict deadlines. If the city does not comply with those requirements, they will be out of compliance with the decommissioning order, and they possibly could be fined. This is Shana Weissman, I'm sorry. Shana Weissman was answering the question. Ms. Weissman said, what I'm getting at is if you get to the point and you find you don't have the money to decommission, that's too late of a point. Ms. Weissman went on to say that this is my number one rule. Don't propose something you cannot or will not do. Once we issue the decommissioning order, the excuse we don't have the money to do this is not going to fly. So my comment was, when we're looking at these studies, we have to remember that checks aren't pouring in yet to pay for this. So the ratepayers are on the line for it. And when we get that decommissioning order, we've got to be able to pay for it. So as we're looking at studies, let's do the ones that we need to do, not the ones that just give us a nice overview or a, wouldn't it be nice to know about the Kinney. We need to know, what do we need to do to relicense and to remove Powell Falls? We don't need to go beyond that. We have the Kinney Consortium. I've been talking to Jill Wasik-Coleman and Rita Kozak. They have a library of the studies they've done. They just don't know how. I can't get FERC and us and them to get together and have a complete library. I know it's going to happen before this ends. So I just don't want to see a lot of money on studies, so we don't have the money when the time comes and we get this decommissioning order, and then we start getting fined because we don't have the money to safely remove the dams. And I just want to say, since there's not a lot of people, while I was doing my homework and kind of looking at this, I realized that the day you walked into your office, that Kevin walked into his office as the new director, the FERC letter was sitting on Charlie Bronic's desk. You did not know what you were walking into. But it was open shortly after that, and we knew we didn't know that we were going to have to relicense it. But I will say, I'm so glad you took the job, because maybe if you knew this was coming, you might have backed away from it. Thank you.
Almost 6 years ago.
Yep.
Thank you. Moving on to the consent agenda. Did you have a comment?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on to the consent agenda, acknowledgement of the Powerful Choices Committee meeting minutes from December 13th. Looking for approval on that.
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor of approval say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same. Consent agenda is approved. First item in new business is a resolution for the engineering contract for the wastewater treatment plant ditch.
Chair, Adam, we have 3 items on our new business tonight, really that have a little meat to them, and we have some very brief presentations, couple minute versions. The first one is our wastewater treatment plant ditch engineering services that we're looking at there. Ron's going to talk a little bit about that. And then we'll move into our South Fork Substation transformer rebuild, and Wayne might have a few words on that, him and I together. And then we're going to talk about engineering services for the South Fork Substation rebuild. That's the third resolution. We'll just spend a very few short minutes on that, and with no further ado, Ron Groth is here, wastewater treatment plant superintendent, to talk a little bit about what we're thinking about with engineering services for our treatment plant.
Good evening. Yeah, I think we've probably covered this a few times. I think we've talked about it in various forums, probably through the CMAR a couple of years now, our compliance maintenance annual report. Kind of when we started, you know, what was a little bit of the driver of this was that report and our influent loadings. So what the DNR does, they look at the engineered design of our plant and then how our influent loadings compare to that engineered design. So if we start exceeding 90% of the engineered design, then we get a grade. Instead of an A, we got dropped to a B grade in our CMAR. So we did a few studies, kind of looking at the plant, what are our limiting factors, you know, what's holding us back here. And everything points to the aeration and our oxidation ditches. That's kind of the bottleneck of the whole plant. Our secondary clarifiers, our influent pumping, all that stuff is pretty well sized. We're in pretty good shape. And just what we can do, yeah, I think
I was just going to point, so these 2 bigger, long, oblong ones here kind of on the left, those are the 2 ditches that Ron is referring to. Those are our oxidation ditches. That smaller single ditch up to the kind of right of it, that's the one that's been removed. That was our sludge storage ditch. That is in our new building where that pile of rubble is sitting right now where our new building is that you guys have been in. So we're talking about oxidation in the 2 long oblong ditches right there. Right now we have brushes in there that just move stuff around.
So yeah, like Kevin said, under each one of those white buildings, there's a rotor in there. So what we'd be doing is we want to eliminate those rotors, put a diffused aeration grid in the bottom of those tanks, and actually this smaller building down here, which currently houses our grid classifier right at the bottom of the screen down here, we want to put the blowers for the aeration system in that building. So we won't have to build another building. That was also part of this project. Then our influent screener, replace it with a smaller size screener that will take out more of the debris, plastics, rags, those type of things that we don't want out in the plant. We can't treat them, we have to get them out. And then our classifier for our grit, put it in that same screening building. It'll make it operationally, right now the guys, they have to haul everything from that grit classifier over to the dumpster in the screening building to dispose of. And then we basically take 2 Class 1 Div 1 areas and we combine it into the one single one, which just is a things like explosive atmosphere and ventilation systems, all that type of thing. We only have 1 to worry about instead of 2. So that kind of encompasses the project. What we did was to get an RFP, we actually sent out to 5 different engineering firms that requested the packet. 3 sent back, as you saw in your packet you got for tonight, Strand MSA and Weston Engineering. We evaluated. It really was a close call between Strand and MSA. You know, we eventually went with Strand, or that's our recommendation to the commission. So,
In your packet, there are some pictures of the brush rotor that's existing. There's also some pictures of what the fine bubble aeration pads would look like as well. Those are in your packet. And then Strand is also was a little bit, if I understand correctly.
low, yeah, dollar per hour in engineering costs. And then they also did bring a little bit more, I thought, on the process control and not just the structural part of it. So,
Ron, maybe you also just want to address, just for transparency, so our CIP budget number on this comes in a little higher, and you might want to just comment on that.
as far as the engineering end of it, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we were pretty much on as far as our CIP goes. We had 2 different areas where we were pulling money from the CIP, and then the grit, moving the classifier actually was coming out of the budget. So those numbers are pretty close to what what our total engineering is. If you look at construction-wise, that's yet to be determined. We need to look at our electrical, how much we need to replace on that. And then also with our construction engineering, how much are we going to need their services? We don't think we're going to need them all that much once we get to the construction end. There's not a lot of shop drawing review, that type of thing, but not a lot of on-site. Of course, we'll need an electrical engineer out there, but certainly not someone every day. So as far as engineering dollars, we're pretty much on our CIP on that. So
Timing, Ron, and then that'd be it?
yeah, timing, what we're looking at is we're hoping if we get going on this fairly quickly, we can do the screener and the grit, do that yet this year, get that all, that has to be done first. So then what we want to do is May of, when school gets out, middle of next May of, it'd be 2020 actually. Then we could start basically demoing out the interior of the one ditch and replacing the aeration system in there. That's our low loading period, so that's the best time for us to do it. And what we do is we do one at a time, get one up, functional, operational, get everything working right before, you know, we went on to the next one. So this is what we're looking at initially is engineering for the system, but then just doing the construction on one ditch. And then if we need to make any modifications or anything like that, we can do it before we move on to the next project or move on to the next ditch. I guess that's the way I'm looking at approaching it. It might end up being a little more dollars that way, but I think we'll get a better project in the long run. I don't think I've ever done a project where I look back and I say, I would have done this a little bit different. It seems to happen every time. This way we have the opportunity in this project to actually do it, make any changes we want before we do the second one, so.
Thanks, Ron.
Okay. Any questions or?
Yeah, I have a question, Ron.
Yeah.
The aeration system in the oxidation ditches, was that redone when the new plant was built, or is that existed the same?
That's existing since 79, 1980.
Well, it's the same stuff.
Yeah, the rotors were, the shafts have been replaced over the years, but it's the same technology, so.
Same with that fine screen?
The fine screen is actually, the one that's in there was put in 2006. Even back in 2006, for the flows they were looking at, the technology wasn't there, so the openings in that screen are a little larger than we'd want. They let too much debris through. So we're going to look in even a finer perforated plate screen. And we can size it. We don't have to size it as big as the last one because we can use that as our backup. So we can go with a smaller screen to catch more of that debris.
And one last question. There was mention in our packet about the demand
Yeah.
going up, and the dashboards don't seem to reflect the demand. They seem flat for the last 2 years.
If you look at flow-wise, you don't really see an increase. It's actually in the BOD loading. If you look at the influent loadings, those you'll see have not too much. In the last 2 years, it has increased a little bit, but if you go back to 3 or 4 years, you can see a pretty good increase on that. And I can get you more information on that if you'd like. I can get you some more numbers. But it's the influent BOD loading, so.
I just want to make sure I understand this right. What you're looking for is a recommendation for design and bid. Do you have any estimates on construction cost? I mean, do you know, there's obviously proposed method that doesn't include the construction, does it?
This, right now, what we're looking at, yeah, right, it's design and bid, so it's
Right.
up to the point of construction.
Sure.
The construction end of it, what we have, I can tell you what we have in the CIP for total for engineering and construction is around $900,000 for all this work. That's CIP and some budget money too.
Okay.
So that's what we're initially looking at, and hopefully, you know, we're gonna be looking at some new motor control centers, things like that. Those numbers could change. I'm hoping they actually change to the lower end, but until we get into it and start reviewing what we need to switch out, it's gonna be tough to pin that number exactly down, so.
Okay. That's fine. The next question, I guess, is there any reductions or savings that come out of putting something new in, or is it just more capacity and newer technology, better system? And that's just me asking, a curiosity question. I want to understand what we're getting into here.
Sure, yeah, and yeah, we will, because right now we do have variable frequency drive, so we can actually turn our motors down right now to a certain extent. But we're looking at replacing two 60-horse motors in a ditch, so 120 horsepower, and dropping that to about wide open on the blowers, about 65 to 70 horse. So just a little over half of the energy we're using right now. And then you talk about, getting more capacity, then this is a 20-year design. So this this would get us out the next 20 years, assuming, that we don't get some just large wet industry that would take a bunch of capacity that we're not expecting, so.
Let me build on capacity too. So if you see there's two ditches, we're only using one ditch right now. And then the two circular ones down below, we're only using one of those right now as well, your clarifiers.
Right.
So we have the physical capacity. Now we just need the internal motor capacity to get that product to the correct oxygen level.
Any other questions? Great.
Okay,
Thanks a lot, Ron. Appreciate it.
I'll move approval of the resolution authorizing the contract with Strand Associates, Inc. for engineering services for wastewater treatment plant aeration improvements.
Any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same. Resolution passes. Next item is the resolution authorizing the South Fork Substation Transformer Rebuild Project.
So Wayne Cyberling, our electric superintendent, is here to talk a little bit about that. I did put a map on the home page, if you can exit out of that. Lene, you want to help me? That one right there. Go full screen with that. There we go.
Yeah, I did it.
So I just put this up there as for our talking points to get Wayne going into what your whistles. This picture is also in your packet. But South Fork Substation, we talk about it like everybody knows where it's at. They don't. I'd sometimes get lost trying to find it. south of campus on a dirt road. You can see Cascade Avenue. You can see where the campus is there. It's south of campus. So that's where South Fork is located. And Wayne also mentioned where the UWRF substation is, just to the north. Follow the red line and then...
Across the creek.
Yeah. So yeah, if you follow the red line, just over the river is where the UWRF substation is, and that is, we're helping them with the rebuild there as well. So.
Correct. Good evening. Yeah, the proposed substation transformer for South Fork. I like to think of South Fork as kind of the forgotten substation in the city of River Falls. It's not seen, it's not heard of very much. So, but the proposal you have in front of you is, it's been gone through with Kevin and I quite a few times on where we're going with this project. This original transformer come from the old power plant. It was the old power plant transformer case. Jordan Transformer took this transformer to their facility, looked at it internally, removed all the infrastructure out of it, and we were talking about would it fit the north substation with all the new area of land that's projected to go out there, and with the design that substation transformer is at the old power plant, wouldn't fit the voltage requirements necessary to be out there. So then we looked at it for this project at the South Fork. The substation there has been roughly there about 45, 46 years, with some of the original equipment still there. And then this remanufacturing facility gave us a quote that you guys see in your packet. The original transformer sits about 8 MVA. That's in that substation. And this new proposed rebuild, it puts it at a baseline of 18 MVA. So we do get quite a substantial increase in size. The cost savings pretty much comes from that, but also the case that we're using from the old existing transformer. There's been some concerns about new versus rebuild. I can tell you everything internally will be new rebuilt. I have no problem with this company. They've done work for us at the at the UW when we had issues there. They rewound those transformers here about 10 years ago. The money for this has come from our CIP project that's labeled for the South Fork Substation rebuild. I think it's 1.2 in the CIP. So
I could explain that a little bit better too. So we have $1.2 million in the CIP to rebuild South Fork Substation. This project here is a little over 600,000. Your next resolution is another 100,000 for the engineering design for this substation. That'll bring us at about 700,000.
correct.
Which will give us about 500,000 left, of which we don't hope to spend the whole amount. But there's always the wish list as you get going. We have circuit breakers and buses and feeder exits.
Yep.
And we have $300,000 to $500,000 worth of work left to complete that substation. Is that accurate, Wayne?
That's accurate. And then, obviously it's project timeline. Do we as a electric department have the time to get it completed, or do we have to maybe look at potentially having some help finishing that project?
Which will affect cost.
Absolutely.
So we are saving money by reusing this transformer and having it rewound, which then you would say, well, geez, then you should be saving money on the bottom line. That seems like a logical thought, but it's going to boil down to how much labor of ours do we use, how far do we go with replacing some of these feeder exits, some of the newer type switchgear. We'll have to make those decisions as we go. We're not going to spend the money just because it's in the budget. We're going to spend the money so we have a solid, rock-solid substation.
Correct.
And within the budget.
Correct.
Hopefully coming under budget. That's the plan.
That's what I look at. The substation transformer is your core of the substation. That's your backbone. Everything else can be worked on as necessary, if need be, as we continue with this project.
Just something aside to a separate thing. So the UWRF is rebuilding their substation in the next couple of years. We're going to be redoing our substation. We have all overhead lines from our substation to the UWRF substation, and they're going to be undergrounding back towards our substation under the river. So a separate project of ours, I believe, is going to be to finish an undergrounding project to our substation, which will really reduce squirrel outages, which is the biggest outage situation out there. So
correct.
And so we eventually will have a really solid, rock-solid system from that substation, which feeds the UWRF substation. It'll all be brand new and underground.
Correct.
There's a plan.
Any thoughts?
I think I get it, and the $200,000 savings, you talked about the old versus new discussion, and I believe you, but I'm curious, what's being rebuilt? What stays in the transformer?
Basically, just the exterior of the transformer. There's
case?
nothing. The case. Yeah, there's
That
nothing.
saves $200,000.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. Okay.
That's kind of how it was described to me. Everything else in the old transformer was aluminum windings, and everything internally is going to be rebuilt with copper, so it meets today's industry standards.
And Wayne and I and our engineer Dave Krause had some long discussions on the phone about that, and Dave Krause convincing me that this was the way to go, and we're going to get increased capacity, and it will essentially be a brand new transformer with
Yep.
Okay.
I was just curious, Kevin, is this similar to a bidding or process? Or is Jordan Transformer somebody we've worked with in the past? Just curious how that works.
Yeah, because this is a special type situation. There's a word for this, Julie, when you go to select a contractor for a specific project.
Is it direct select?
Yeah.
I mean, sole source?
Sole source probably, because they extracted the transformer.
Yep.
It's in there, and so they were contracted to do that out of the North Sub. We've worked with them in the past. They have it in their possession.
Yep.
It's just we've had a working relationship, and they've got it.
Right.
It would cost more now for them to pack it up and ship it to somebody else and try to have them do it.
Yeah,
So, and if we didn't have a good working relationship with them, maybe we would suggest something different.
right.
They've got it from the last project and are
Yeah, and
all ready to go.
they've worked with multiple utilities besides, us. They've worked with Madison Gas and Electric, off the top of my head, I believe Excel. I think they've worked with We Energies out of the east side of the state. So they're working with a lot larger customers than we are. So,
Good, thanks.
Any other questions? Thanks a lot, Wayne.
thank you.
I'll make a motion to adopt the resolution authorizing the South Fork Substation transformer rebuild.
Second.
All those in favor, or any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same. Resolution passes. The next item, number 4, is the resolution authorizing the professional services for the South Fork Substation project.
So since we kind of just covered that project, I'll just real briefly say Dave Krause has been, you saw in your packet, an initial agreement with him, but that dates back to 2006. Dave Krause and his company has been our go-to company since then, and maybe even slightly before then. Is it before 2006 even, Wayne? 2006?
Yeah, he worked with a different company before, and then 2008 is, I think, when the city signed up with him at that point.
This memo in the packet is dated from the Utility Commission
Okay.
meeting. Anyway, so we have to have an engineer for the project. He was our engineer for the power plant substation, which we also had a professional services agreement with him there. And we want to make sure that we're on the up and up. So we did a memo and resolution to show that he's going to be our engineer for this project as well and carry on his knowledge. So you'll see too, so we have a $1.2 million project. This is about $100,000. I was doing a presentation with Reed Ronsky where he brought out a chart, and the chart was supposed to show how much professional services are as a percentage of the whole. Often they go to 15 to 17% in this area. So just under 10%, I think, is a solid number to have as engineering services. Also, you'll see I included in the packet some of his original hourly rates, and they're not that far off today from what they were 10 years ago. So he's charged us fair price, and he's done a great job for our utility.
Absolutely. He's a phone call away. Literally, at any day, time, night, he answers his phone. So
anyway, that's really the background on Dave Krause's company and what he's done for the city, and just getting his professional services agreed upon for this project, South Fork Substation.
Any questions? All right.
I'll move approval of the resolution authorizing professional services for the South Fork Substation project.
Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same. Resolution passes. And now we have a presentation regarding, from Leslie.
Yeah, so Leslie Brodkowski from TRC was going to be here in person today, but her home office is in Fond du Lac, and she has a couple sick kids. So we had Mike work today on getting her on Skype for Business. So Leslie's going to be with us live via the phone. Hello, Leslie.
Hi, Kevin. Can you guys hear me?
Oh yeah, we can hear you really well. We can hear you. We can hear you really well. So back when FERC was here for 2 days, back in November, and it may have been a subsequent council meeting, or maybe it was at the FERC meeting, when I did promise a transparency through this process. The first piece of this process is by December 28th, any agency could request a study related to our relicensing. We had 33 study requests come in. Leslie and I have been working hard together trying to sort through those requests. And tonight, really what I want to do is, in the name of transparency that I promised, is show you what the requests were, how we grouped them together, and then what we plan on recommending to FERC that we should be studying. So Leslie's going to go through a little presentation today from her home office, and with modern technology, you can close your eyes and pretend she's standing right there because it's going to seem like it. So Leslie, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Kevin, and thank you again for having me here to give you guys an update on FERC process. All right, can you give me control? Oh, it worked there that time. Okay, sorry about that technology. So again, just very short background. We all know that we're in the middle of a FERC relicensing process with the proposed action of relicensing Junction Falls and decommissioning and removing Powell Falls using the FERC integrated licensing process. So just kind of quickly to go over where we are in the FERC schedule, where we've been and where we're heading. We did file the notice of intent and pre-application document to initiate the FERC process back in August. FERC issued their scoping document 1, which outlines kind of some of the resource issues that FERC is looking at and needs to address in their environmental assessment. That came out in October. And then FERC came to River Falls back in November 15th and 16th for their scoping meeting. Some of you in attendance tonight were also at one or both of those meetings. And then next on the list was basically a period of time where agencies, stakeholders, tribes, basically anybody who's interested in the process could either file a comment or a specific study request that they would like the licensee, which is River Falls Municipal Utilities, to conduct. FERC can issue scoping document 2 if needed. If they do, we don't anticipate much of anything different. At least not anything that would change what we're looking at in our studies. And where we are right now is at the stage where we're evaluating file proposed study plan with FERC. So as Kevin said, we received over 30 studies, and a lot of them did cover a lot of the same different areas. So we could have gotten a few different requests for recreation, one for certain different areas. So it wasn't 30 individual, completely different things that we're looking at necessarily. There's definitely ways to group them. And we'll be going through all of those tonight, and then also they were broken out in your information packet as well. The due date for filing our proposed study plan is coming up pretty quick. It's February 11th. Following that, everyone will have about a month to look over what we proposed before we hold a study plan meeting. The study plan meeting is scheduled for March 13th, and that'll take place in River Falls. Anyone's welcome to attend. And then folks get a couple months to review those and provide comments, again, formal comments to FERC. After we receive those, file a revised study plan, another deadline for comments, and then back in July, so it's, you can see what a long process this is and how many different iterations people have to kind of go back and forth and comment. But in July is when FERC will make the final study plan determination. Studies could start as early as this summer, but probably most of them will be taking place next summer of 2020. Anybody have any questions on the overall schedule before I go forward?
None yet?
Yeah, I have a question.
Oh, there is one.
A number of months ago, our board recommended we go to the city council with this integrated license process versus some people got up and spoke about a streamlined process of filing the license. If we would have went down that avenue of not going down the integrated license process, would all of these studies still have been requested? Does that question make sense?
So there isn't really a streamlined process per se. The other process you could have used was the traditional licensing process. And that one, so the integrated licensing process involves FERC right away up front. It's much more deadline heavy. There's, more specific timelines that everyone needs to make, agencies and FERC and everybody. And with the TLP, you still have agencies, stakeholders requesting studies, and the licensee would still propose on what they want to do. So there's not as much back and forth. FERC doesn't make the final determination. But after you go through the whole process, you do your studies, you file your license application. After all of that is when FERC issues a scoping document and study request. So after you've gone through everything, think you've had everything figured out, FERC can actually come back and ask for more studies. So in projects that have a lot of interested stakeholders or maybe a little bit more complicated, integrated is usually the way to go because everybody's talking up front. I tried to make that as succinct as possible. It's kind of a complicated explain the difference between the two, but
So either way, there would have been a number of requests made.
Correct.
Either process.
yeah.
Okay, thank
And
you.
either way, at the end of the day, I mean, FERC is the regulator, so regardless of process, they can keep coming back until they get what they need to do what they need to do.
There was also mention of, this integrated process would be a lot more expensive than the other process you mentioned. Is that-
We don't really see that to be true. I mean, I think there's a few more meetings that are required in the FERC regulations, but I mean, I think you're having kind of the same amount of back and forth and same time talking to people and doing studies. It's just kind of a matter of when you're doing them. With the TLP, in some ways, you're guessing a little bit more about what FERC is maybe going to require, whereas with the ILP, you know up front what they require for studies, so it can defer the cost to later in the process. I don't find usually the cost to be less with TLP.
Thank you.
I think in general, I mean, the less complicated projects use TLP, so they may appear to be less expensive, but that's just because they're easier projects that people aren't questioning. All right, let's move on then. So just kind of a quick overview of what the proposed study plan looks like. The proposed study plan will include a schedule, everything from progress reports, study reports, meetings, and then start and completion timelines. There will be a section that includes a list of studies that were requested but not proposed or adopted by the licensee. We'll also have a section that responds to additional information requests. So in FERC's letter, they actually had some bullet points requesting additional information, which is not uncommon. And then also a section on proposed study plans. So this is what the licensee is proposing to do. So the purpose of all of these studies, so why, we're in relicensing, the pre-application document kind of lays out what we know to date, but what is the purpose of the studies? And the purpose of the study is really to give FERC enough information to conduct their environmental assessment of the licensee's proposed action. So it's basically, in this case, we're proposing to relicense one dam and decommission and remove another dam. So that's essentially what we're looking at studies to do in that specific action. There's cases too where we know we need state and federal permits for the dam removal in particular. So while FERC might not be requesting, or they might not require a certain study at the end of the day, if we know we need it for an agency permit, some of those were included in here as well. We did receive a number of study requests, so FERC, different state and federal agencies, and also some of our local nonprofits and partnership groups. I will make one comment. We did get comments from National Park Service before government shutdown. We haven't received anything from Fish and Wildlife. I don't know if they would have filed comments by the deadline had the government not shut down, but we'll just kind of watch that and see how it goes if they end up filing late comments or not, or late study requests. So that's just something we might have to keep an eye on in this unique situation. Study plan requests they covered a number of different resource areas. So we tried to break them into different specific topics to kind of group them together. I'm going to be running through each of these different topic areas. First one was project operations, and we received requests from both DNR and Trout Unlimited for this one. And we tried to, different groups certainly requested similarities, but also differences in what they were asking for. So we have a just kind of really high-level summary, both on your information packet that's broken out in more detail, and then an even higher-level summary here on the presentation. But essentially, this request was for an assessment of past and present hydropower project operations with concern about run-of-river. And our response is that we're planning on developing a operations plan. So instead of looking back at, maybe what happened in the past, we're going to look forward and make sure we have a solid plan on how we're going to maintain run-of-river operations for the continued operation of Junction Falls. So at this time, no study is proposed for that specific topic area. The next one was the hydrologic and hydraulic evaluation from DNR. And this one is basically an engineering evaluation looking at stream flows, channel dimensions, linear gradients, and then also conducting the H&H study is what they call it. So SEH actually did a lot of this already. DNR broke this request into two specific study requests. And the first one, SEH, really covered most of it, not all of it, but most of it. So what we're proposing to do is to build off of what that study did and get the information that DNR needs. And this is one that's not, FERC may or may not require something like this, but we know DNR needs this assessment before they're going to give the Chapter 31 permit for removal. And then also, DNR had mentioned the FEMA analysis portion as well. And in talking to our project engineer, they said it really makes sense to do that once the dam is out, not before, because then you're just modeling something that may or may not actually be the case. So part of that request from DNR we're proposing to do after the dam is removed. Next request is for water quality. And requests range from temperature and dissolved oxygen and also thermal modeling. Requests received from a few different entities for this one. And our response is to conduct study to look at dissolved oxygen and temperature. Essentially what you can do for that is data sons record both at the same time anyway, so I think it makes sense to look at both and kind of pair both dissolved oxygen and temperature together. We do have a lot of temperature data, at least in certain locations of the project area, but not dissolved oxygen data. So we are proposing to do that in at least 3 different locations. And then thermal modeling that was requested, we're not proposing to do that. Essentially, that was looking at kind of predicting how things would change, with dam removal. So, taking out the lower dam should certainly help to make water temperatures colder downstream. So, again, not planning on doing the thermal modeling as requested. Next topic area is sediment. So the requests were for evaluating sedimentation impacts of dam removal. And we're proposing to generate a decommissioning plan that's going to utilize some of our existing sediment data that we do have. And then it will also include engineering evaluations and modeling. And we'll look at the drawdown of Lake Louise, how sediment's going to be transported and managed, also stormwater and erosion control, and the overall dam removal process. And that's going to be prepared and submitted with the draft license application. Excuse me. Next on the list is fish and aquatic resources. So a lot of different study requests in this area. It's kind of a big topic area. So some of the studies that were requested included fisheries and riverine habitat evaluation, shoreline habitat assessment, aquatic plant survey, aquatic invasive species survey, biological impact evaluation, fishery survey, mussel survey, and macroinvertebrate survey. And what we're proposing to do is, where we have it, utilize as much existing information as possible. So right now we're not proposing to do studies for the riverine habitat evaluation, fisheries, the macroinvertebrates, or the mussel survey downstream of Powell Falls. And some of those are, existing reports. Other are conversations with resource agencies. And studies that we're proposing to do include shoreline habitat mapping and aquatic invasive species surveys.
Leslie, are you able to share with the group your conversation last Friday regarding mussel surveys?
Sure. Yeah, I had a conversation with Lacey Kitchell from Wisconsin DNR. She's pretty much the mussel expert with Wisconsin DNR. And, I was, looking at the request, and we were kind of crunching some numbers and looking at data. And we know that St. Croix has, wonderful area for mussels, and, that's about 16 miles downstream. But looking at host fish species data and, the temperatures of the Keeney, we weren't seeing the concern for mussels. So I called her up and at least, are we really expecting to see any native mussels, either, common or rare species in the river? And she said, it's really not great habitat for mussels. So, she really wasn't seeing a very clear need for a survey. She said, yeah, it would be interesting. It would be kind of great and, fun to know if there's anything out there. But she said chances of, finding anything out there are pretty low, which is why, because we were kind of going back and forth. Do we propose it? Do we not? But at this point, I think it's not great habitat for mussels. It's great habitat for a lot of other things, obviously. But I think for now, we're proposing not to do that mussel survey.
That would be 1 minus 1.
Can I ask a question? Since you're
Yeah.
since you're talking about not doing a study, I'm just noticing that Trout Unlimited studies seem to have bigger numbers attached to them, and I understand with the DNR they carry pretty good authority and will likely have to do a lot of what they're requesting, but Trout Unlimited is essentially a private group, isn't it? And I'm assuming they're not offering to pay. Where do those stand as far as we're concerned?
Well, and part of the difference, too, so with DNR study requests, they broke theirs out very specifically.
Right.
It was a shoreline study. It was a fishery study of this lake. It was water quality of this specific thing, whereas a lot of the Trout Unlimited studies grouped, 5 of those things together. So if you really tease them apart, the Trout Unlimited studies, aren't necessarily any more than what cost-wise what the DNR is asking for. Some cases where they were, I think Trout Unlimited did ask for a couple different modeling scenarios that others did not. And anytime you're using modeling, it gets expensive with time and software.
Is it pretty likely?
So part of it's an optics.
Okay, is it pretty likely that the DNR studies will double with theirs as well? I mean, it looks to me like there's a lot of overlap. So
yeah, so if you look at the fish and aquatic resources, there are 4 different requesters: DNR, Kinnickinnick River Land Trust, River Alliance, and Trout Unlimited, that all had requests in that specific area. So like for mussel surveys, a couple different entities at least proposed mussel surveys. Macroinvertebrates, DNR proposed that as a distinct separate study, whereas I think Trout Unlimited, for example, had that wrapped in with their biological evaluation of, quite a few other things. So there's a lot of overlap, which is why we kind of tried to break out in different topic areas. And if you look at the handout, it does give you a little bit more detail of the specifics of each of those requests. So you can see what some of those differences are.
And maybe to help Patrick too, where I'm at with this and with Leslie and our city administrator, Scott Simpson, I mean, I have a fiduciary responsibility to our ratepayers, and we are going to do the studies that FERC requires us to do. But we're not going to be doing a lot of nice to know type studies, so at least that's not going to be our proposal. So we're going to be doing the studies that FERC requires us to do to renew the license and surrender the Powell Falls. But we're probably not going to be requesting a lot of things that would be nice to know.
that's nice to know.
Okay, any other questions before I move on? Okay. All right, next on the list is terrestrial resources. So requests for this area included invasive species surveys and also evaluating wildlife and wildlife habitat. What we're proposing to do for this one is some pretty basic habitat mapping, a terrestrial invasive species survey, a rare species survey, mostly botanical species, and then also a wildlife survey. So while DNR has these broken out as individual distinct study requests, a lot of these, you can have the same person out there doing kind of all 3 of these topic areas at the same time. If you're looking for invasive species, you can also be looking for rare species and listening for birds and watching for chipmunks all at the same time. So there is some efficiency that can be built into these. Wetland delineation, this was requested by River Alliance, and this is something we were kind of talking about doing anyway. So before DNR issues their Chapter 31 permit and before the court issues a 404 permit for dam removals, we are going to need to conduct a wetland delineation to know where the existing wetlands are. It's a checkbox item for permit applications. So we're proposing to do that 2021 or later. Wetland delineations in Wisconsin are good for 5 years, so we don't want to do it too early. So if we're looking at dam removal sometime between 2022 and 2026, 2021 makes sense for doing that work. And that would be focused on the area of the proposed change. So essentially everything below the Powell or below the Junction Falls Dam where the reservoir will be changing. Got recreation requests from 5 different entities. So what they were asking for is an inventory of existing facilities and public access, estimate of projected capacity, evaluation of recreation use, which comes in the form of visitor surveys and economic evaluation. So what we're proposing to do is conduct a study generally following the FERC requested study protocols. FERC was actually very specific in what they were. They only had 2 study requests. One was recreation and one was cultural resources. And they were very specific about what they were requesting. And Shayna, who's our project coordinator with FERC, is actually a recreation person. So it makes sense to propose and follow what FERC is asking for, because they're going to want you to do that anyway. Next topic is cultural resources. Only requester for this was FERC. And what they're looking at is to define the area of potential effect, which usually is your project boundary, your FERC project boundary, plus any other potential areas of land disturbance. Conduct a phase 1 archaeological assessment, and then also consult with SHPO and tribes. So responses to conduct a study generally following the FERC requested study protocols. Aesthetics. So there's a request for the evaluation of aesthetics and impacts from the future operational period. And aesthetics is a section that will need to be addressed in the license application document. So we're proposing no study specifically at this time, but addressing that topic in the license application. And then for economic, the request is for economic analysis of the cost of operation, maintenance, and benefits. And our response is that we're going to provide basically the FERC requested economic information in the license application, and that no study is proposed. So next steps are, we're still in the process of pulling everything together, so we're going to draft and file the proposed study plan. The study plan meeting again, March 13th. Revised study plan is due June 11th. And then FERC will make their final study plan determination on July 9th. So if we propose to do something, FERC will say, okay, they're not going to say, no, don't do that. But if there's something that FERC feels that we need to do, they could come back in that study plan determination and say, no, you really do need to look at this. So that's kind of what we're keeping in mind as we're going through all this. We're proposing what we feel are reasonable and what FERC really does truly need in order to do their environmental assessment. So that's the thought process behind all of what we're recommending tonight.
And Leslie, you can help reinforce this too. So just for the advisory board, I pressed Leslie hard last week to put dollar figures on the studies that we were going to do. And Leslie said she just didn't feel comfortable yet trying to put dollar figures on the studies that we're agreeing to do. But by February 11th, when we submit, Leslie will have dollar numbers on there, if not before. Leslie, talk to the group about putting some costs next to our activity and when you plan on having that done.
Yeah, and in the breakout that you all have, you have the requester cost estimates, which you were looking at, and usually through ranges. So, and the reason I wasn't comfortable putting prices in yet is because we had just gotten to the point where we'd agreed, okay, these are the studies we're planning on doing. And so until we really put together our study protocols, which is what we're doing in the proposed study plan, it's hard for us to come up with a idea of exactly how much that's going to cost. So how many man hours, how many acres are we looking at, that sort of thing. So those are all numbers that we'll be coming up with. And the final number, what you're actually ultimately going to end up with will be based on how you do it. If you can get some local folks in the community to help out, or if an intern from River Falls can do certain elements, or if you're hiring consultants, some of the things require a PE, a professional engineer. So some of those costs are probably not going to vary as much, but there's definitely different ways to look at it. And I just didn't have that last week yet.
And the tricky part is that the February 11th date is before the first council meeting in February. It's also before the next UAB meeting. So when Leslie has those numbers, we'll complete the chart and get that emailed out to the board and the council to let you know dollar numbers. Any more questions for Leslie after a presentation? Again, this was just more for information sharing. Want to make sure you folks heard it. We did invite City Council tonight, so we have Chris Gagne's here. So thanks, Chris, for coming out. And maybe the time for if Chris had a question, I guess, or
Sure.
you run it. I don't know if he does or
Anything
not.
that you want to ask at all?
I guess the only question that I have, which comes to mind,
I'm sorry, Adam. I guess that was your show there.
No, I
The only
completely
question
forgot
that
about
I
it.
might
So.
have is just because they're proposed, in the end, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're on this presentation that they're going to be required. Is that correct?
Leslie, can you answer that?
So let me scroll up. So like for I ended on recreation. So there's, multiple requests, different types of requests for recreation study. And River Falls Municipal Utility is proposing to conduct a study. So if they're proposing to conduct it, FERC isn't going to come back and say, no, you don't need to conduct it. So if there's any that we say, let me scroll up to the outline of the. So looking at your proposed study plan content, there's a discussion of studies that we're proposing to not adopt. And then there's the proposed study plans. If we're putting something in the proposed study plan, FERC's not going to say don't do it. But if we have something in the not adopted, it's possible that FERC could come back later on and say, no, you need to do study X.
All right. So I guess my follow-up question then would be, so you see like Trout Unlimited, they have a ton of studies in there, and I think the point was made that some of them dollar figures are pretty high. Nothing says that they can't do those studies by themselves and then submit them to FERC or to the utility later, or the P3, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So they can.
And even with the studies that, we're proposing to do, I mean, if there's opportunities for, teaming with local partners to get those done, that could help reduce costs to the city. But if you tell FERC you're going to do them, it has to get done.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions for Leslie?
I guess my question is, not knowing this as well as Leslie does, because she's been involved in these before, but does this seem fairly normal, the studies that you're seeing come through? Is that?
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's, all projects are different and come in different, shapes and sizes. This one, while it's a very small project from an energy generation standpoint, it's got some complexity to it, and the fact that, we are proposing to, some of the studies are kind of specific to continued operation of Junction Falls, and then some of the studies are specific to, specific removal of another one. So you have, two different areas that you're looking at and kind of two different proposed actions. So yeah, I'm not surprised, I guess, at kind of the level of studies that we're proposing and looking at right now. You guys did a great job of gathering quite a bit of information up front, but there's always information gaps that need to get filled in the process.
Well, Leslie, thank you very much for spending your time with us tonight. The technology worked, and I think the message got conveyed. So thank you very much.
Well, good. Thank you. And if anybody has questions, let me know.
All right. Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Moving on to item number 6 would be the finance report. Are we gonna? Hi.
We're lucky
Welcome
to have
back.
the Assistant
Hey,
City
thank
Administrator
you.
here tonight to
Good
give
to
us
be back.
yeah, good to see you.
I just come back for the year end because those are all good numbers, you know. Sorry you didn't get a report in your packet. We are working on finalizing 2018. There's still a lot of work that's left to do, but Tracy put together where we're at today, and most of the funds look just fine in the positive. The water and electric about 100,000 each, at least with the numbers we have so far. The sewer utility has a significant surplus for 2018, and I think that's, as we've talked about before, that cash is going to be applied to that North Interceptor sewer, so we won't have to borrow for that.
Right.
So I think that's positive too. The stormwater for 2018 was a negative about 50,000, but looking back at 2017, it had a surplus about of 50,000, and we do have a 2-year budget, so it basically evened out for both years. So nothing out of the ordinary that I can see. I think things are running well. We can't predict the weather, so with the water, you just kind of never know, or the heat. You know, it's just funny how those things affect the revenues, but the expenses, at least for electric, move along with whatever the revenues are. So that one's pretty easy, but the water fund is a little tricky. So anyway, I can answer any questions you have.
We have none.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Number 7 is the utility dashboards. If anybody has any questions on those.
They're kind of reflecting Julie's report. Looking at those again. It's been it's a good year. Everybody's in the black, and we're doing a lot of projects, but still humming along. And again, I want to remind everybody that Julie and I had mentioned it in passing today that we probably will be doing a cost of service study for electric this year to determine whether or not 11 years has been too long to look at our rates. So we're going to be looking at that this year. So
I do have a question, although this may be more with your report too. It's been very cold with no snow on the ground. Are we getting more breaking pipes, or is that affecting the water services at all?
Well, that's a very good question. Ron's here. So Ron, we said we had our 6th water main break in the last month.
It seems like we've had a lot of those.
Yep. So
compared to other years.
So Ron and I have talked about this, and I don't think there's a direct correlation to the frost and water main breaks per se, but I think there is a direct correlation to frost in the ground and then how the water comes out of the ground. For example, I'll just go backwards. That water main break may have happened last May.
Okay.
And with a thawed ground, water can dissipate. It doesn't surface.
Mm-hmm.
But when the ground freezes, I think the water gets pressurized differently in the ground, takes different pattern, and makes its way to the surface faster because it's not getting absorbed. So we think that's part of it. These breaks just didn't happen Friday and start showing up on Sunday.
Okay.
They probably were broken 6-9 months ago, maybe longer in some cases, and they finally, because of the freezing and thawing patterns in the soil, make their way to the top. Is that what you...
Yeah, I think, this year...
You could pull the microphone up now too, Ron. Yeah, there we go.
Our frost levels aren't really too bad. I mean, they're not abnormal, they're not deeper than, they're probably shallower than you'd see. I think more of the issues we have is with the changing temperatures and cast iron pipes and just fluctuating water temperatures, heating and cooling of the pipes. And then the frost, you kind of get some frost, it comes out again, just the ground movement, shifting of stuff. We're not seeing any frost down around the mains yet, but obviously, we're having more than normal, more main breaks than normal. But I think it's kind of hurt us with the fluctuating temperatures. I'm hoping if it gets cold and stays cold for a while, we'll actually be better off. So see what happens. So
6 in the last month approximately. I think we've surpassed last winter.
Yeah, I think we had maybe 3 all of last season, so, but it varies. As long as I've been doing this, some years are real bad, some years you don't have any. It just is the way it works out.
Similar type breaks, Ron?
Yeah, I think everything's been identical. It's all been circular cracks, and most of them are 6-inch water mains, so for whatever reason, yeah, most cast iron, there's been some ductile iron, so.
Another common denominator you've noticed is substandard position where subsoil?
Yeah, the
Backfill?
fill, usually it's fill
Yeah,
situation. You had
backfill.
something around the pipe that caused settling, so.
Okay.
And that probably plays into some ground movement with alternating temperatures. I mean, you see it on the roads and stuff too, so.
No kidding. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions on the utility dashboards at all? Then moving on to number 8, which is the utility report.
I don't have really any other further announcements tonight. Had 2 squirrel outages last week, affected just a couple customers yesterday and then one last week as well. So squirrels are still active. We had the 6 water main breaks that Ron's folks are handling very well. We have a pretty strict communication process with all those water main breaks. We notify, we do door hangers on those directly affected. We use social media. So we've got that down where we're notifying people pretty readily. AMI, we have our AMI, Advanced Meter Infrastructure Kickoff Meeting Wednesday. We have about 24 of us from throughout the city are getting together to get a plan that it's going to affect many, many departments in the city. To talk about electric metering and water metering for AMI. Other than that, everybody's been healthy and working hard. We had a little snafu at the North Sub late today. You want to explain that quick? That's kind of interesting and something you might see again here in the next week. That's why I want to mention it. I didn't hear about that at the meeting. So
Yes, we had,
this will give Wayne gray hair.
it's already started. Relays, we've talked about relays in substations in previous. The North Substation is a great piece of infrastructure we have, but the relays are in there, our ABB DPU 2000s.
Ron, Wayne, what does a relay do?
The relay is monitoring the feeder. It's monitoring it to the point of your outages. You see it operate. It allows it to operate back and forth with electronically, so it's a quicker, faster than a mechanical. Mechanicals will take up to 10 seconds. These relays can function down to 3 cycles of a 60 cycle, so within microseconds. Eliminates potential equipment failures being more catastrophic than I guess making a bigger mess.
When you see the
so to
lights
say.
blink, when you see the lights blink, that means there might have been a relay operation because there was a tree branch on the line or
Correct.
something like that.
Yep.
These electronic relays operate so quickly you might not even notice it.
Yep.
And some of the sensitive equipment in the corporate parks doesn't want to notice it.
Right, absolutely. So these relays of, like I said, they're 15 years old. They're past support from ABB. We actually had one fail today, late this afternoon when we were working on the SCADA panel out at the North Substation. So we'll see. We do have a spare one of the same vintage sitting in one of the switchgear bays. So we'll see if that can be transferred over, and hopefully life will be good. Otherwise, we'll have to look at means of replacement of some sort. So.
Thanks for the update. I know that's fresh, and you were thinking about that a lot sitting over there. So
I was, actually. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Wayne.
that's all I have.
All right. Any announcements at all? All right. Looking for a motion to adjourn?
I will move to adjourn.
We are adjourned.
Thank you for your time tonight, everybody.